Barack Obama came up for seconds, which was a bit of a bit of a treat, bit of a good sign, So here you go. We had a bit of a talk, and he said, "I'm allowed to eat more because I went for a run this morning." So that's no problem, mate.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. It's the summer series of Deep in the Weeds, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome back the man, the myth, the legend, Ben O'Donoghue. Ben, how are you?
Good, thanks, mate. I thought you were talking about someone else there for a second. The man, the myth, the legend. You well?
Oh, very well. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. I'm glad to sort of be getting towards the end of the year. Go on holidays on Saturday, so I'm pretty stoked about that. Bit of time with the family.
The thing about you as a chef is that, when I think of summer and chefs, I think of you. You've had television shows where you've gone surfing and cooking, and I just always think about seafood and salads and all this sort of fresh way to eat. What does summer mean to you in regards to food?
What does summer mean to me when it comes to food? I think primarily, first and foremost, it's just easy, uncomplicated, and fresh. That's what it means to me. Whether it's a big bucket of prawns or a beautiful sort of like salad, for us now, tomatoes are bang in season. So whether it's a big stone fruit and heirloom tomato salad seasoned with sherry vinegar, and maybe throw some fresh cheese on there, sort of like stracciatella, something like that, or some nice soft feta, that sort of thing. Something that's just bursts in your mouth and is refreshing, or something really cold like ice cream.
You live in a much warmer climate than I do down here in Canberra. You're in tropical world. What sort of seafood do you like to celebrate sort of now in summer? Is there anything that's popping out that you're using?
Well, I think oysters are fantastic. So up here we've got the Quandamooka rock oysters, from Moreton Bay. They're wonderful. They're small, minerally, and just full of flavour. Other things like prawns, red spot prawns, banana prawns now, king prawns, especially when we get a little bit of rain as well, which is fairly common in the afternoons. You'll get a thunderstorm and a big freshwater flush, and that sends the prawns crazy, so that's great. And of course, spanner crab, that sort of thing. That's just that just sort of reeks of summer for me, Queensland summer.
You've done many TV shows, but Surfing the Menu comes to mind. Do you have any stories from the adventures of those days?
Oh yeah, a few. Which ones? I'll have to cherry pick the ones I can talk. I think one that really stands out for me was when we went to Kakadu, and we were sort of hanging out with these young TOs, traditional owners, and they took us to the most remarkable spot in Kakadu, overlooking the floodplains, and we were taken into this billabong, and one of the guides said to us, you're so lucky because no white man has been in here for like many, many years, and we were fishing. And I mean, Curtis is the worst fisherman. He's fantastic at everything else, but he's not the best fisherman. And literally every cast we were catching like thumping barramundi. And so, of course, on the menu for the show was barramundi, as well as magpie goose. The young fellas cooked us up this magpie goose, which admittedly they had caught like several months earlier because it was dry season when we went there, and you couldn't access the geese because they're right in the middle of the the floodplain, and so they had this frozen magpie goose that they left on the bonnet of a four-wheel drive for the day to defrost. And then they proceeded to pluck it there and then on the dirt, of our little of our camp, and we made a little fire with not bunya nuts, pandanus nuts, and they became the coals, and they just spatchcocked this thing out, and little Derek threw it on the coals and was turning it, and there was a little sort of scuffle over who was going to eat the heart and livers and stuff like that, because obviously those sort of parts of the animal are the most important part, because they're full of nutrient, and you get the spirit of the animal from those luxurious little bits. And so the littlest kids, normally they'll give them to the elderly or the young, so the littlest kids got the heart and the liver. And the whole time me and Curtis are just thinking to ourselves, we're going to die. we're going to get some food disease from this thing, because it's just been defrosting for 8 hours at the most unhygienic sort of level, and then plucked on the floor. So that was pretty mind blowing. And then I did this whole barramundi steamed, and I finished it off, and I tempered it with curry leaves and some other aromats, ginger, shallots and whatnot, and then sort of just poured that oil over the top of it, and made a little sort of sauce from some of the steaming liquid with soy and whatnot. And this kid, Derek, just absolutely sucked this carcass clean, and it ended up looking like one of those sort of cartoon caricatures of a fish frame, and he was using the bones to pick his teeth and suck the eyeballs out of the head. He was like, "Lovely, bruss, lovely." So that's always like one of my fondest memories. It was such a great experience,
Magpie goose is an extraordinary thing to eat. I've only experienced it once, and I'll never forget it. How would you describe the flavour of it?
Well, it's very much like duck, probably a little bit richer and more intense. Dark, the meat very dark, It kind of reminded me of like when I was in the UK eating widgeon, which is like a waterfowl, not dissimilar to a duck. And this, obviously they're eating like shellfish and bivalves and stuff like that. So they have this remarkable flavour, and the fat is so rich as well. I wish they were more commercially available for sort of the industry. I think that'd be amazing.
This episode is proudly supported by Montague Plums, handpicked for you.
So the eating experience of our plums is sweet. That's a primary driver. It's got to be sweet, but it's also got to have enough acid, because the mix of acid and sugar is what gives fruit its flavour. And in a plum, it tends to be slightly higher acidity. And then a really nice, full, not dry, but juicy explosion of juice into your mouth as you bite into it. That's nirvana for us in terms of a plum.
For more information, go to montague.com.au.
You've worked all over the world and travelled quite a bit. Do you have any sort of travel food stories that really jump out as fond memories for you?
Yeah, quite a few. Like I think some of the best ones I had was when I worked at the River Cafe, and every year in October, November, we would go to Italy as a group. So it was like a week, but they'd split the team up into two. So one bunch would go for 4 days, and the next bunch would go for 4 days. We would swap over, and the purpose of those trips were really to go to places like Selva Piana, Fontodi, a few other places to source olive oil for the restaurant. And David Gleave from Liberty Wines, who was the major wine supplier to the cafe, was kind of our guide and facilitator, and so we'd go to these amazing places. And I remember once we went to Piedmont, we went up to Barolo, and we went to this restaurant, and the name slips my mind now, it'll come to me, but it was I think it was called Don Cesaro's or something like that. But the chef was this like complete eccentric, bit of an alcoholic, and you never knew whether the restaurant was going to be open. And so we rocked up, and it's like this beautiful little restaurant on the side of a valley, and you've got the Nebbio that drifts in, so this mist fills the valley. And so we walk in, and there's a fire going in the corner with a spadino on it, and there's caprelli roasting on the fire. And at the entrance of the restaurant, there's this big glass conch with filled with white truffles, and we just had the most amazing lunch. White truffles on everything. I remember I had this braised artichoke and fried egg fried egg dish that the waiter just came over and just absolutely smothered in white truffles. I remember Theo had this stuffed big white onion that was filled with cheese and an egg yolk. And subsequently, I've copied that recipe many times at various sort of stages in my career. It's so amazing. And that, again, would get sort of laden with white truffles. It was just so decadent. And we're drinking Aldo Conterno Barolos and stuff like that. It was just really, really, really special. There was one trip we did actually that was quite embarrassing for me because just prior to us leaving, one of the guys in the kitchen, an Aussie guy called Anthony, was leaving. So we went out in the Raz and had a fairly large night and ended up back at this guy, Ben's house, who was one of the other chefs at River Cafe at the time. And about 6:30 in the morning, they're all passed out. And me and this guy called Darren, who was another Aussie, shaved these guys. We shaved their eyebrows. We pulled their pants down and shaved their legs. We shaved their we couldn't believe we got so far with it. It was incredible. Anyway, we'd arranged to meet up the following afternoon at Wonky's in Soho and have some Chinese, and they rocked up and they looked like they had sort of like chemo treatment. There was no hair on their face. They were wearing caps. It was so funny. Anyway, so to jump to the story of Italy, we were catching a cab out in Addison Lee out to the airport, and just before we left work, Ben made all these sandwiches for us to have on the trip. And I was in the cab eating my sandwich, and I'm like, oh, it's really sweet. What's going on? And Ben goes, oh, that's just the artichokes that've been marinated in the lemon and the honey and whatnot. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, so we miss our flight, and we have to fly from Gatwick to Rome instead of flying into Florence. So we get to Rome at 12 o'clock at night. We've got a 3.5 hour drive, and I'm the only one with a driver's license, so I go and hire the car. And the whole time my stomach's rumbling. And I'm, oh, that's no good. And I got in the hire car, and I passed wind, I farted. And it was the worst fart that I've ever done in my life. And I'm super embarrassed. So I open all the windows, pick the guys up at the pickup point at the airport, and I'm thinking to myself, I can't fart like that again in the car. We're in this little Fiat Punto with, 3 big guys in the back, me driving, and one of the girls from the front of the house and the thing. So for 3 hours, I just held on to these farts, or I tried to, and I was in intense pain. I was doubling over, and I had to just relinquish. And so it kind of backfired. Ben had laced my sandwich with laxative. And and I've got a constitution of an ox, and it just seemed to upset my stomach. It didn't make me sort of go to the toilet incessantly, but I had flatulence like you wouldn't believe. And the next day we went out to this restaurant in just outside Florence, and I forget the name of it, but it was an amazing restaurant. And every 5 minutes I had to get up and leave the table to go to the toilet to pass wind. And I swear to God, Rose thought that I was doing drugs, because I literally. And the worst part was we were there for 4 days, and it lasted for 4 days, even longer. And I actually had to share a car with Rose Gray, Ruth Rogers, and David Glebe from Liberty Wines, and I'm still farting. And I just had to let it go, and I had to tell them what had happened to me, and it was so funny. It was so funny. So they completely understood why I was leaving the room every 5 minutes in the restaurant. But yeah.
Well, I knew you'd have some weird food stories, but you got me with that one. You've cooked all sorts of sort of incredible events and for amazing people. Do you have any stories of a big event or something that you put on where you've cooked for people?
I think I've probably spoken about this. I'm not sure, but I did the G20 here in Brisbane, and Tony Abbott asked me to do that, so that was an amazing opportunity. And we did he wanted a barbecue buffet, which was kind of surreal, because you got these world leaders, and our restaurant team sort of worked the whole thing, front of house, back of house, and we put I used I wanted to use Queensland Wagyu, but Josh from Goma was doing Wagyu on their menu. So Tony wanted lamb. So I got Flinders Island lamb up because I was using it in the restaurant at the time. And did that. And then we did this amazing buffet of local seafood and salads and breads and whatnot. And they're coming up to the buffet. It was really kind of weird because they would ask what certain things were, and I'd say, "Oh, that's a Moreton Bay bug," and the word "bug," they all kind of like left it. I went, "Oh, bug," and then I said to I think it was the South Korean leader, the female at the time, they're lobsters, basically like lobsters. And as soon as you said lobster, boom, they went. and Barack Obama came up for seconds, which was a bit of a bit of a treat, bit of a good sign, So we had a bit of a talk, and he said, I'm allowed to eat more because I went for a run this morning. So that's no problem, mate. And it was pretty amazing. He was a great guy, and one of our girls at the front of the house had a crush on Vladimir Putin, and his table was like having the biggest laugh. They had the South Korean president or prime minister, Vladimir Putin. Who else was on that table? I think the Spanish prime minister, and it was just kind of like surreal. It was a great experience, but it was stinking hot as well.
What were the pressures like to cook at an event like that?
I suppose just one, I was paranoid about the security of it and getting in there and being searched and having all the produce messed around with. But we actually when we bumped in, we just rocked up to the back of Parliament House, grabbed all our poly boxes and moved to the kitchen. And we didn't even get searched. I was expecting a bomb squad to come through and check my circulator and all this sort of stuff. And the timelines were freaking me out, making sure that because they're on such a deadline to make sure and we were cooking like the fish and everything like that needed to be cooked to almost so it was coming off the grill as they came out to eat. And they took all the guards off the barbecues. So what it actually did was make it sort of harder to cook because there was no shield from the wind and the barbecues weren't getting hot enough, and it was so frustrating. I was freaking out, and but it all came off. It was an amazing experience.
It's been a pretty turbulent period of time, but we seem to be getting back on track. What's your favourite thing going on in food at the moment in Australia?
Oh, I think just just awareness and the celebration of producers, and chefs sourcing stuff, from real local farms and stuff like that. A lot of people up here are using Falls Creek. There's co-ops and stuff like that are facilitating local farmers getting their produce to individual restaurants. So that sort of thing. And just the quality of the artisan produce being given to chefs now is just amazing, and also sort of the ethical side of things, with those mussels coming from Jervis Bay, with all the packaging being sort of compostable, and I'm sick and tired. I get stuff from my butcher, and I've got packing tape around my boxes, and I hate it, I hate it, and I just want them to stop using it. Things double vacuum packed, and it's just like, gone are the days when you used to get stuff dry, it's crazy. I mean, plastic is one of the biggest hates. I just can't stand it, I want to just send it back to the suppliers. So, thanks for the meat, but you can have all this shit back,
Well, Ben, as always, it's incredibly entertaining catching up with you. Loved having you on the show today. Have a great summer, and we'll catch up again soon.
Yeah, thanks, mate. You as well. Slip, slop, slap, mate.
Thanks, Ben.
Cheers, buddy.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.